I remember the exact moment my life split in two, as if someone had drawn a sharp line down the middle of everything I knew, cleanly severing my past from my future. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening, just 3 days after we buried my father. The sky had been heavy all day, pressing down with the kind of gloom that clings to your skin and makes it hard to breathe. The air smelled like wet leaves and regret, and I was sitting in my father's study, a room I had always avoided when he was alive. The old desk was cluttered with his life, papers, pens, a half-empty bottle of scotch he'd always pretended he didn't drink. I had come there not out of sentimentality, but necessity. As his only son, it fell to me to sort through his belongings, to make sense of what he left behind. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dad had spent his entire life controlling every detail, yet in death, his world was chaos. I don't know why I opened the drawer. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the bottle of scotch staring at me from the corner of the desk. Maybe it was fate. Either way, when I slid it open, I found a letter, folded neatly, tucked beneath a stack of unpaid bills. It was addressed to me in his precise handwriting, the ink smudged at the edges as if he'd written it in a hurry. The words, "For Michael," stared up at me, and I froze. Dad wasn't the sentimental type. He didn't leave notes, didn't say things he didn't have to. I opened it with trembling fingers, the paper crackling in the quiet room. Michael. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. There's something I need to tell you, something I've kept from you your whole life. You have a sister. Her name is Emily. I stopped reading, my eyes burning as if the words had scalded me. A sister. I reread the sentence 3 times, convinced I'd misunderstood. But the words didn't change. They sat there on the page, immutable, unraveling everything I thought I knew about my family. The rest of the letter blurred as my mind raced. Emily. Who was she? Why had Dad never told me? And what kind of man keeps something like that from his own son? I forced myself to keep reading, my chest tightening with every word. I met Emily's mother long before I married your mom. It was a different time, a different me. Things ended badly, and I never stayed in touch. But a few years ago, she reached out. She wanted to let me know that Emily exists. That she's my daughter. I didn't know how to tell you, or your mom, so I didn't. I know that was wrong. I'm sorry, Michael. I hope someday you can forgive me. The letter ended abruptly, as if he'd run out of words, or courage. There was no explanation, no reassurance, just silence where I desperately needed answers. I sat there for what felt like hours, the rain tapping against the window, my father's ghost filling the room. My sister. Emily. Her name felt foreign on my tongue, like a word I wasn't supposed to say. 1,000 questions swirled in my mind, each one heavier than the last. How old was she? Did she know about me? What did she look like? Was she anything like him? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the letter clutched in my hand like a lifeline. My father had always been a man of secrets, but this was something else. This wasn't a white lie or a half-truth. This was a betrayal. The next morning, I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring, her voice strained but familiar. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral, both of us navigating our grief in separate silos. Mom, I began, my voice shaking, did you know about Emily? There was a pause, and for a moment, I thought she'd hung up. But then she exhaled sharply, the kind of breath that comes from years of holding something in. I didn't think you'd find out like this, she said finally, her words heavy with regret. I only found out a few months ago myself. Your father, he didn't want to tell you. He thought it would ruin everything. Ruin what? I demanded, my anger bubbling to the surface. My life. My relationship with him. Newsflash, Mom, keeping this a secret didn't exactly do wonders for our bond. Her silence was deafening. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose as the weight of it all threatened to crush me. What do you know about her? I asked, softer this time. Not much, she admitted. I know she lives in Seattle. She's in her 30s. And I know. I know she's coming. Coming. My voice broke. Coming where? To the reading of the will, she said, each word a punch to the gut. She reached out to your father's lawyer a week ago. She's contesting the inheritance. The words hit me like a freight train. My father, who had spent his life building an empire, who had prided himself on control and legacy, had left behind a mess so tangled I wasn't sure I'd ever unravel it. I ended the call without saying goodbye, my hands shaking as I set the phone down. Emily wasn't just a name on a letter anymore. She was real, and she was coming. That night, I dreamt of my father. He was sitting in his study, the same way he always did, his hands folded neatly on the desk. But instead of looking at me, he stared past me, his eyes hollow and unrecognizable. When I woke up, I felt like I couldn't breathe. The days leading up to the will reading passed in a blur. I went through the motions, sorting papers, making calls, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop imagining her. Emily. What she looked like, what she sounded like. Whether she hated my father as much as I did in that moment. When the day finally arrived, I sat in the lawyer's office, my stomach in knots. The room was small, dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of old wood and stale coffee. The lawyer, a stoic man named Mr. Davis, sat across from me, a thick folder in front of him. And then she walked in. She was nothing like I expected. She wasn't imposing or loud or anything that matched the storm of emotions I'd built up in my mind. She was small, almost fragile-looking, with dark hair pulled into a loose bun and eyes that darted nervously around the room. For a moment, she looked at me, and I saw something there, something that made my chest ache. "Michael," she said, her voice soft, almost apologetic. "I'm Emily." I stared at her, the weight of her words crashing over me. My sister. The stranger who carried half my blood, half my father's secrets. And just like that, the storm began. Emily stood in the doorway, the sound of her voice still echoing in my ears. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process the fact that this stranger standing before me was my sister. My mind struggled to reconcile the warmth in her tone with the betrayal that had brought her here. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped further into the room. I noticed how tightly she clutched the strap of her bag, her knuckles pale. She was nervous too. Good, I thought bitterly. At least I wasn't the only one. "I wasn't sure if you'd even want to see me," she said, her voice faltering slightly as she spoke. "But I felt like I had to come." Her words stirred something in me, a pang of empathy I didn't want to feel. But instead of responding, I turned to Mr. Davis, the lawyer who sat stone-faced behind the desk, his hands folded neatly over the folder. He cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the tense silence. "Shall we begin?" he asked, glancing between the two of us. I nodded stiffly, refusing to look at her. She took a seat on the opposite side of the table, leaving a wide gap between us. The distance felt symbolic, as if even the air between us knew how far apart we were. Mr. Davis opened the folder and began to read, his voice monotone and deliberate. He spoke about my father's assets, his properties, the company he had built from the ground up. But I barely heard him. My mind was elsewhere, spinning through questions I couldn't ask aloud. Who was Emily? What kind of life had she lived? Did she hate our father for abandoning her, or did she love him for the crumbs of attention he must have thrown her way? And then Mr. Davis said something that jolted me back to the present. Mr. Carter explicitly stated that his estate is to be divided equally between his two children, Michael Carter and Emily Holloway. Equally. The word shot out of my mouth before I could stop it, sharp and incredulous. I turned to Emily, my anger bubbling over. "You think you deserve half of everything he built? You didn't even know him." Her face fell, her expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. She opened her mouth to respond, but Mr. Davis held up a hand, cutting her off. "Mr. Carter's wishes were clear," he said firmly. "The estate is to be divided equally. There is no room for negotiation." I leaned back in my chair, my fists clenched at my sides. My father's betrayal had cut deep, but this felt like salt in the wound. He had lied to me my entire life, hidden an entire person from me, and now he wanted me to share everything with her. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I didn't come here to fight," she said quietly. I wanted to know him. And now, I want to know you. Know me." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and harsh. "You've known about me for what, months? Years? And you didn't think to reach out? You waited until he died to show up with your lawyers and demand a piece of the pie. She flinched, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of guilt. But it was quickly drowned out by my anger. I didn't even know about you until last year, she said, her voice trembling. When your father reached out, I was shocked. I never asked for any of this. Right, I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. Because it's just a coincidence that you're here now, conveniently in time for the inheritance. That's not fair, she said, her voice rising slightly. You don't know me, Michael. You don't know what my life has been like. You're right, I snapped. I don't. And frankly, I don't care. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. Mr. Davis cleared his throat again, his discomfort palpable. I suggest we take a moment to collect ourselves, he said carefully. This is a difficult situation for everyone involved. I stood abruptly, the legs of my chair scraping against the floor. I need some air, I muttered, storming out of the room before anyone could stop me. The hallway outside was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the building's air conditioning. I leaned against the wall, pressing my palms against my eyes as if I could block out the chaos in my head. How had my life unraveled so quickly? Just a week ago, I was grieving my father, trying to make peace with his death. Now, I was faced with the reality that he had lived a double life, that he had kept something so monumental from me. And then there was Emily. I hated her for what she represented, my father's lies, his failures, but I couldn't ignore the sadness in her eyes, the way her voice had cracked when she said she wanted to know me. A part of me wondered if she was telling the truth. Maybe she really hadn't known about me until last year. Maybe she really didn't ask for any of this. But even if that were true, it didn't erase the betrayal I felt. I didn't know how long I stood there, lost in my thoughts, but eventually, the door to the lawyer's office opened, and Emily stepped out. She hesitated when she saw me, her hands fidgeting nervously. Michael, she began, her voice soft, tentative. Can we talk? Just, the two of us. I wanted to say no, to tell her to leave me alone, but something in her expression stopped me. It wasn't just sadness, it was longing, the kind of ache that comes from years of searching for something you can't name. Fine, I said begrudgingly. Talk. She stepped closer, her movements cautious, as if she were afraid I might bolt. I know this is hard for you, she said, her eyes searching mine. It's hard for me too. I didn't ask to be born into this situation any more than you did. I folded my arms, my expression guarded. So, what do you want from me? Forgiveness? Understanding? No, she said quickly. I don't expect that. I want a chance. A chance to get to know you. To make sense of this mess we've both been thrown into. Her honesty disarmed me, but I wasn't ready to let my guard down. Why now? I asked, my voice sharp. Why didn't you reach out when Dad told you about me? I was scared, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know how to approach you, or if you'd even want to know me. And then, he died. I thought maybe it was too late. Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. For the first time, I saw her not as a threat, but as a person, someone who had been hurt by my father just as much as I had. I don't know if I can do this, I said finally, my voice breaking. I don't know if I can look at you and not see everything he lied about. I understand, she said softly. But I'm not him, Michael. I'm just me. I stared at her, my emotions warring inside me. Part of me wanted to push her away, to protect myself from the pain of her existence. But another part of me, the part one didn't want to acknowledge, was curious. Curious about the sister I never knew I had. Emily didn't press me for an answer. She just stood there, watching me with those nervous, searching eyes, waiting for me to say something, anything, that would bridge the enormous gap between us. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come, and the silence between us felt like a canyon too wide to cross. Eventually, she sighed and stepped back, giving me space. I'm staying in town for a few days, she said quietly. If you decide you want to talk, here's my number. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small piece of paper, holding it out to me. I hesitated for a moment, then took it, folding it quickly and shoving it into my pocket without looking at it. I didn't say thank you, and she didn't wait for one. Instead, she nodded slightly and walked away, leaving me alone in the hallway with nothing but the sound of her footsteps fading into the distance. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter my father had written. The words blurred together as I read them again and again, searching for something that wasn't there, an explanation, an apology, a reason to forgive him. But all I found was the same hollow confession, the same stark truth. Emily existed. She was my sister. And my father had chosen to keep her a secret. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid swirling in the dim light of the kitchen. It burned going down, but I didn't care. I needed something to dull the edges of the anger, the confusion, the grief that threatened to consume me. My phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with my mother's name. I stared at it for a moment before picking it up, reluctant to hear her voice. "Hey," I said, my tone flat. "Michael," she began, her voice tight with worry. "How did it go? How do you think it went?" I snapped, immediately regretting the sharpness in my tone. "She was there, Mom. Emily. She's real, and she wants her share of everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm so sorry, honey," she said finally. "I know this is hard for you. It's hard for me too." "Is it?" I asked, my voice rising. "Because you knew, didn't you? You knew about her, and you didn't say a word." "I didn't know how," she admitted, her voice cracking. "Your father swore me to secrecy. He said it would destroy our family if the truth came out." "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "It's out now, and it's done exactly that." She didn't respond, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying. Instead, she sighed deeply. "Michael, I don't have the answers you're looking for. But please, don't shut Emily out. She's not to blame for any of this." "Yeah," I muttered. "I'll think about it." We ended the call, and I sat there in the quiet of the kitchen, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. All I knew was that my world had been turned upside down, and I didn't know how to put it back together. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a sense of dread I couldn't shake. I had dreamed of Emily again, though the details were already fading. In the dream, she was a child, standing alone in the rain, calling out for someone who never came. I shook off the memory and reached for my phone. The piece of paper with Emily's number was still in my pocket, crumpled but intact. I stared at it for a long time before finally typing the number into my phone. The text I sent was short, almost curt, "Let's talk. Coffee shop on Main at 2 p.m. Her reply came quickly, "I'll be there." I arrived early, needing time to collect myself. The coffee shop was small and cozy, the kind of place my father would have scoffed at for being too casual. I ordered a black coffee and found a table near the window, my thoughts a chaotic swirl as I waited for her to arrive. When she walked in, I felt my breath catch. She looked different in the daylight, softer somehow. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose braid, and she wore a simple sweater and jeans, blending in with the unassuming crowd. She spotted me immediately and approached the table, her movements tentative. "Hi," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the cafe. "Hi," I replied, gesturing for her to sit. She slid into the chair across from me, her hands folded neatly on the table. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence stretching between us like an invisible wall. "Thanks for meeting me," she said finally, breaking the tension. I nodded, my fingers tightening around my coffee cup. "I need to know," I said, my voice low but steady. "Why are you here, Emily? Really?" She looked down at her hands, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I don't know," she admitted. "When your father reached out to me, it was overwhelming. I'd spent my whole life wondering about him, and suddenly he was there, wanting to talk, wanting to make things right." "And did he?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. She shook her head. "Not really. He tried, but it was complicated. He was ashamed, I think. And scared. He didn't know how to be a father to me after all those years." Her honesty caught me off guard, and I felt a pang of sympathy despite myself. "What did he tell you about me?" "That you were his pride and joy," she said softly. "That you were everything he wished he could have been." I snorted, the sound harsh and bitter. Yeah, well, he had a funny way of showing it. She didn't argue, just watched me with those searching eyes, as if trying to piece me together from the fragments of our conversation. I know you're angry, she said finally. And you have every right to be. But I'm not here to take anything from you, Michael. I just want a chance. A chance to know you, to understand this part of myself I've been missing. Her words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable, and I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to push her away, to protect myself from the pain of letting her in. But another part, a quieter, stubborn part, wanted to believe her. Do you really think we can fix this? I asked, my voice breaking slightly. I don't know, she admitted. But I think it's worth trying. For the first time, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this mess my father had left behind could become something meaningful. But as I looked at Emily, at the sister I never knew I had, I couldn't shake the feeling that the road ahead would be anything but easy. Emily and I left the coffee shop with tentative plans to meet again, though the details were as vague as the relationship we were trying to build. She suggested dinner the next week, a neutral, public space where we could talk more without the weight of lawyers and inheritance looming over us. I agreed, but part of me wondered if I'd actually go through with it. The truth was, I didn't know how to feel about her. Every time I thought about Emily, I was torn between curiosity and resentment. She hadn't asked to be born into this mess, I knew that much, but her existence was a constant reminder of my father's lies, his failures as the man I thought I knew. I spent the next few days in a haze, throwing myself into work to avoid thinking about her, about him, about any of it. But no matter how many late nights I spent in the office, no matter how many cups of coffee I drank to keep myself going, the thoughts crept in like shadows, inescapable and suffocating. And then came the phone call that shattered whatever fragile stability I'd managed to cling to. It was a Thursday evening, and I was sitting on my couch, scrolling mindlessly through the news on my phone, when my mother's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself for another uncomfortable conversation. "Mom," I said, my voice flat. "Michael," she began, her tone urgent. "I just got off the phone with your father's lawyer. There's something you need to know." My stomach tightened. "What is it now?" "It's about Emily," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, as if someone might overhear her. "She's not just contesting the inheritance. She's hired investigators. She's digging into the family business." I sat up straight, my pulse quickening. "What are you talking about?" "I'm not sure," she admitted, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Mr. Davis said she's requesting old financial records, contracts, everything. She's claiming she has a right to know where the money is coming from, but I think there's more to it." The air seemed to thicken around me, my thoughts racing. Why would she do that? What does she think she's going to find? "I don't know," Mom said, her voice trembling. "But, Michael, you need to be careful. I don't think she's as innocent as she seems." I hung up the phone, my mind spinning. Could it be true? Was Emily playing some long game, pretending to want a relationship while secretly plotting to take more than just her share of the inheritance? The thought filled me with a fresh wave of anger, but beneath it, I felt something else, fear. Fear that my father's secrets ran deeper than I realized, that there was more to his story, to our story, than I wanted to uncover. The next time I saw Emily, it was at the small Italian restaurant she had suggested. I arrived late, partly because of traffic and partly because I needed the extra time to steel myself. She was already seated at a corner table, sipping a glass of red wine. When she saw me, she smiled, a hesitant, almost shy expression that made her look younger than I knew she was. "Hey," she said as I slid into the chair across from her. "Hey," I replied, my tone cool. The waiter came to take our orders, and for a few minutes, we talked about nothing, the weather, the food, the noisy couple at the next table. It felt strange, sitting across from her, trying to pretend like this was normal, like we were just two people sharing a meal and not two strangers navigating the wreckage of our father's choices. Eventually, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Why are you digging into the family business?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Her eyes widened in surprise. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I said, leaning forward. "I know you've been requesting financial records, contracts. What are you looking for, Emily?" She blinked, her expression shifting from confusion to hurt. "I'm not. I mean, yes, I asked for some documents, but only because I wanted to understand where the money was coming from. I'm not trying to take more than my share, Michael. I swear. Then why hire investigators? I demanded, my voice rising. I didn't hire anyone, she said, her voice trembling. The lawyer suggested it, okay. He said it was standard procedure in cases like this. I studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit, but all I saw was fear and frustration. Either she was an incredible actress, or she was telling the truth. Why should I believe you? I asked finally, my tone softening slightly. Because I don't want your money, she said, her voice breaking. I don't want anything from you except a chance to know you. To figure out where I come from. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. The anger that had fueled me for days began to dissipate, leaving behind a hollow ache. What if you don't like what you find? I asked quietly. She looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the edge of her wineglass. I don't know, she admitted. But I have to try. The rest of the dinner passed in uneasy silence. We made small talk, avoiding the topic of our father, the inheritance, the tangled web of lies that had brought us together. When the check came, I insisted on paying, a small gesture that felt hollow but necessary. As we stood outside the restaurant, the night air cool against my skin, Emily turned to me, her expression unreadable. Thank you for coming, she said. I nodded, unsure how to respond. She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. Here, she said, holding it out to me. What's this? I asked, taking it reluctantly. Something Dad gave me, she said softly. I think you should have it. I looked at her, my heart pounding. What is it? Just read it, she said, turning to walk away before I could ask any more questions. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the envelope in my hand. It felt heavy, as if it contained more than just paper. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and opened it, my hands shaking. Inside was a photograph, worn and faded, of my father holding a baby. The baby had dark hair and wide, curious eyes, Emily's eyes. There was a note tucked behind the photo, written in my father's familiar handwriting. Michael. I know I've failed you in ways I can never undo. I know this letter isn't enough to make up for the years of lies, but I hope someday you'll understand why I did what I did. Emily didn't ask for any of this, and neither did you. I kept her a secret because I thought I was protecting both of you, but I see now that I was only protecting myself. Please don't let my mistakes destroy what's left of our family. You deserve better. Both of you do. Love, Dad. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter, my chest tight with a mix of anger and sadness. My father's words felt like both an apology and a plea, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive him, or Emily. All I knew was that the picture in my hands told a story I couldn't ignore. And for the first time, I wondered if there was a way to build something new from the ruins he had left behind. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the photograph and the letter. My father's words haunted me, replaying in my mind at the most inconvenient moments. Please don't let my mistakes destroy what's left of our family. They were simple, almost cliched words, but coming from him, they felt monumental. I hadn't told Emily that I read the letter. I wasn't ready to talk about it with her, or anyone. Instead, I carried it with me, folded neatly in my pocket like some kind of talisman. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a reminder that maybe, just maybe, there was something worth salvaging in all of this. A week later, Emily texted me again. Hey, I'm going to the house tomorrow. Thought you might want to come along. She didn't need to clarify which house she meant. My father's estate, a sprawling property on the edge of town that felt more like a museum than a home, was still sitting untouched, waiting for us to decide what to do with it. The idea of walking through those rooms again, with all their memories and ghosts, filled me with dread. But I couldn't say no. Not this time. The next morning, I drove out to the estate. The long driveway, lined with ancient oak trees, felt oppressive, as if the weight of my father's presence was still clinging to the air. Emily's car was already parked in front of the house, a modest sedan that looked out of place against the grandeur of the mansion. She was waiting for me on the front steps, her hands shoved into the pockets of her coat. When she saw me, she smiled, a small, tentative gesture that I couldn't quite return. "Thanks for coming," she said as I approached. I nodded, my eyes scanning the familiar facade of the house. "Let's just get this over with." We stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of wood polish and dust. The grand foyer, with its marble floors and sweeping staircase, felt colder than I remembered, as if the life had been drained from it in my father's absence. "I thought we could start in his office," Emily said, her voice hesitant. I stiffened at the mention of the room. It was the last place I'd seen my father alive, sitting behind his desk, his expression stern as he lectured me about something I couldn't even remember now. But I nodded and followed her down the hallway. The office was just as I'd left it, the cluttered desk and heavy bookshelves untouched. Emily walked over to the desk and picked up a framed photograph, studying it with a faint smile. "Is this you?" she asked, holding it up. I glanced at the picture, a younger version of myself, maybe 10 or 11, standing next to my father on a fishing trip. I remembered that day vividly, not because it was particularly special, but because it was one of the rare times he'd seemed genuinely happy. "Yeah," I said, my voice tight. "He loved that trip. Said it was the first time I didn't complain about getting up early." Emily laughed softly, setting the photo back on the desk. "He told me about that trip once," she said. "He said you caught the biggest fish he'd ever seen." I frowned, the memory clashing with her words. "I didn't catch anything that day," I said. "He did." Emily's brow furrowed. "Really? That's not how he told it." Her comment hung in the air, a strange inconsistency that I couldn't quite make sense of. Why would my father lie about something so small? As we sifted through the piles of papers and knickknacks in the office, I started to notice more of these cracks in the stories I thought I knew. Emily mentioned a birthday card he'd sent her when she was 16, a heartfelt note about how proud he was of her accomplishments. But my father wasn't the kind of man who sent birthday cards, not even to me. "He told me he regretted not being there for your graduation," she said at one point, her voice quiet. I stared at her, my chest tightening. "He was there," I said. "Front row, clapping louder than anyone." Emily's face fell, and I could see the realization dawning on her, the same one that was creeping over me. My father had been two different people, one for her, one for me, and neither of us had known the whole truth. Later, we moved to the living room, a cavernous space filled with antique furniture and family portraits. Emily lingered in front of a painting of my grandparents, her expression unreadable. "I always wondered what they were like," she said softly. "They were strict," I said, surprising myself with the honesty in my voice. "But they loved him. They pushed him to be the best at everything, and he tried to do the same for me." "Did it work?" she asked, turning to look at me. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But mostly, it just made me feel like I was never good enough." She nodded, her gaze returning to the painting. "He told me he never wanted me to feel that way," she said. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know whether to feel jealous or relieved. On one hand, it stung to think that he'd been a better father to her in his own way. On the other, it made me wonder if he'd learned from his mistakes with me. As the day wore on, the tension between us began to soften, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was a start. When we finally left the house, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. Emily turned to me as we reached our cars, her expression tentative. "Thanks for coming," she said. I nodded, my hands shoved into my pockets. "Yeah. It was good to see the place again." She hesitated, then added, "Maybe we could do this again sometime. You know, go through the rest of the house." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked back at the house, at the life my father had built and the secrets he'd left behind. "Maybe," I said finally. As I drove away, I realized that for the first time, I didn't feel completely alone in all of this. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. The days after our visit to the house were quieter. Emily didn't text, and I didn't reach out either. It wasn't that I didn't think about her, I did, constantly, but I needed space. Space to process, to think about what I'd learned, and to figure out what my father's lies meant for the life I'd built around them. Then came the email. It arrived late one evening as I was finishing up work. The subject line was simple, "Something you should see." It was from Emily. For a moment, I debated whether to open it. Part of me was still wary of her motives. But curiosity got the better of me. The email was short, just a few sentences. Michael. I was at the house again today, and I found something in the study. I think it might answer some of the questions we've both been asking. Please, come back with me tomorrow. You need to see this. Emily. Attached to the email was a single photo, a close-up of what looked like a keyhole, hidden behind one of the bookshelves in my father's study. The next morning, I was back at the house. Emily was already there, waiting in the driveway with a nervous energy that I couldn't ignore. Thanks for coming, she said, falling into step beside me as we walked toward the house. What exactly did you find? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. I'll show you, she said, leading me through the front door and down the hall to the study. The room looked the same as it had a week ago, cluttered and untouched, but Emily headed straight for the far wall, where a row of old leather-bound books sat gathering dust. Here, she said, pulling out one of the books. Behind it, barely visible in the dim light, was a small metal keyhole embedded in the wood paneling. Did you know this was here? She asked, looking at me. No, I admitted, leaning closer to examine it. What's behind it? I don't know, she said. I couldn't find a key. We searched the room together, combing through drawers and boxes, but the key wasn't there. Frustration bubbled in my chest, but then I remembered something. Wait, I said, standing up abruptly. There's a safe in his bedroom closet. He always kept a few things in there, important documents, personal stuff. Emily followed me upstairs, and together we searched the closet. Sure enough, buried beneath a stack of old sweaters, was the small safe. I punched in the code, a combination I knew by heart, and the door clicked open. Inside, among the paperwork and an old watch, was a small brass key. This has to be it, I said, holding it up. Emily nodded, her expression tense. Back in the study, my hands shook slightly as I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly, and with a soft click, the hidden door swung open. Behind it was a narrow staircase, descending into darkness. Seriously? I muttered, peering into the shadows. Emily grabbed a flashlight from a nearby shelf, clicking it on. Let's go, she said, her voice steadier than I felt. The stairs creaked under our weight as we descended, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a small, windowless room. It was dimly lit by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The room was filled with filing cabinets, old boxes, and a large desk covered in papers. It looked like some kind of archive, a private space my father had gone to great lengths to hide. What is all this? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, I said, moving toward the desk. The papers were a mix of handwritten notes, financial statements, and old photographs. One photo caught my eye immediately. It was of a woman I didn't recognize, standing beside my father. She was younger than he had been when I knew him, her dark hair framing a face that looked eerily familiar. That's my mother, Emily said softly, leaning over my shoulder. I glanced at her, my chest tightening. She looks like you. Emily nodded, her eyes fixed on the photo. He must have kept this here all these years. We sifted through the rest of the papers in silence, piecing together fragments of a story we hadn't been meant to discover. There were letters my father had written but never sent, journal entries filled with guilt and regret, and legal documents that hinted at financial arrangements he'd made to support Emily's mother. And then we found the file. It was tucked into the bottom drawer of one of the filing cabinets, labeled simply with the word Emily. Inside were more documents, birth certificates, medical records, and a letter addressed to her. Emily picked it up, her hands trembling as she unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the words, her face pale and unreadable. What does it say? I asked after a moment. She handed me the letter, her voice shaking. Read it. Emily. If you're reading this, it means I never found the courage to tell you the truth. I've spent my entire life trying to make up for the mistakes I made when I was younger, but some things can't be undone. You deserve better than the man I was when I left your mother, and I'm sorry for the years I stole from you. I hope that one day, you and Michael can find a way to forgive me, and maybe even each other. You're more alike than you realize, and together, You can be stronger than I ever was. Please, don't let my failures define you. Love, Dad. I set the letter down, my throat tight. For the first time, I felt the full weight of my father's choices, not just the lies and secrets, but the pain he must have carried with him every day. He was ashamed, Emily said quietly. He didn't know how to fix what he'd broken. Yeah, I said, my voice hoarse. But he tried, in his own way. We sat there for a long time, surrounded by the remnants of his life, neither of us knowing what to say. When we finally left the hidden room, the sun was setting outside, casting the house in a warm, golden light. For the first time, the estate didn't feel like a place of loss. It felt like a place of beginnings, a place where we could start to rebuild. Emily turned to me as we stood on the front steps, her expression soft but resolute. I'm glad we found this together, she said. Me too, I admitted. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope, not just for understanding my father, but for forging a connection with Emily. It wasn't going to be easy, but maybe, just maybe, it was possible. The drive home from the estate that evening felt lighter than it had ever been. The house no longer loomed in my mind as a monument to betrayal. Instead, it had become something else, a place where the pieces of my father's fragmented life had come together. Emily and I had found a truth neither of us expected, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of it alone. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the letter from my father spread out in front of me. His words lingered in my mind, please, don't let my failures define you. I didn't want to admit it, but they had defined me for far too long. My anger, my resentment, my refusal to see beyond the lies, they were all tied to him. But now, for the first time, I felt like I could let some of that go. I thought about Emily, about the way her hands had trembled as she read the letter addressed to her. She was just as much a victim of his choices as I was, and yet she had faced it all with a quiet strength that I couldn't help but admire. I picked up my phone and sent her a message. Thanks for today. Let's talk soon. Her reply came almost instantly, I'd like that. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I met several times. Coffee turned into dinner, and dinner turned into long walks where we talked about everything, our childhoods, our lives, the men who had connected us and kept us apart. She told me about her mother, a strong but reserved woman who had shielded Emily from the truth about our father for as long as she could. She always said he wasn't ready to be the man we needed, Emily explained one night as we sat by the river. I think she was right, but that doesn't mean he didn't care. I told her about my childhood, about the father who had pushed me to be perfect but rarely told me he was proud. He wanted me to be the best, I said, staring at the water. I think he thought that was the only way to show he loved me. We were both trying to earn his love in different ways, Emily said softly. Yeah, I admitted. And maybe he didn't know how to give it. We fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that comes when two people are beginning to understand each other. As the date of the will's finalization approached, we both knew we had to make a decision about the estate. The lawyers had made it clear, we could sell the house and split the proceeds, or one of us could keep it while buying the other out. Do you want it? Emily asked one afternoon as we walked through the empty halls of the estate. I shook my head. No. It's too much house for me. And honestly, I think it's time to let it go. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. I feel the same way. It's beautiful, but it's not home for either of us. We agreed to sell the property, a decision that felt strangely freeing. The house had been a symbol of my father's legacy, but it wasn't ours. We needed to build something new, something that wasn't tied to his mistakes. The day of the sale was bittersweet. Emily and I stood on the front lawn, watching as the new owners, a young family with 2 small children, walked through the house with excited smiles. I think Dad would have liked this, Emily said, her voice quiet. Yeah, I agreed. Maybe they'll fill it with better memories than the ones we had. She turned to me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. We'll make better memories too, won't we? I nodded, my throat tight. We already are. With the sale finalized, we turned our attention to dividing the inheritance. But when the time came to sign the paperwork, Emily surprised me. I don't want half, she said firmly. I stared at her, shocked. What are you talking about? It's what Dad wanted. I know, she said, her expression resolute. But you were here, Michael. You were part of his life in a way I never was. You built things with him, even if they were messy and imperfect. I can't take half of that away from you." Her words left me speechless. For so long, I'd seen her as a rival, someone who might take more than she deserved. But in that moment, I realized she wasn't trying to take anything, she was trying to give. "I don't deserve more than you," I said finally. "We both lost something because of him." She smiled, a bittersweet expression that mirrored my own. "Then maybe we can agree to do something good with it. Something he would have been proud of." We decided to set aside a portion of the inheritance to start a foundation in our father's name. It would support causes he cared about: education, community outreach, opportunities for kids who needed a little extra help. It wasn't redemption, but it was a step toward making something meaningful out of the mess he'd left behind. Months passed, and slowly, the anger and resentment I'd carried for so long began to fade. Emily became a regular part of my life, not just as my sister, but as my friend. We weren't perfect, and neither was our relationship, but we were trying. One evening, as we sat in a small park near my apartment, Emily pulled out the photograph we'd found in the hidden room, the one of her mother and our father. "I keep thinking about this picture," she said, tracing the edges with her fingers. "It's strange, isn't it? How one decision can change so many lives." "Yeah," I said, looking at the photo. "But maybe it doesn't have to define us." She smiled, tucking the picture back into her bag. "I think he'd be proud of us, you know. For not letting his mistakes tear us apart." "Maybe," I said, leaning back on the bench. "But I think I'm more proud of us for figuring it out without him." We sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. My father's secrets had changed everything, but they hadn't destroyed me. If anything, they had led me to something I never knew I needed: a sister, a connection, a chance to rebuild. The past wasn't perfect, and neither was the future, but for the first time, I felt like I could face it with an open heart. And that, I realized, was the real legacy my father had left behind.